Hello and welcome to Tranquil Repose. My name is Faye and today we're going to talk about the expanded history of the Valeyard. So to get started, who is the Valeyard? Well, the first time we see the Valeyard is in the Trial of a Time Lord series with Colin Baker's Sixth Doctor. In the story Trial of a Time Lord, the Doctor is on trial for meddling in the affairs of the lesser species of the universe, and the Valeyard is the person who has brought these charges to light. Although, over the course of the serial, it is revealed that the Valeyard doesn't simply want to prosecute the Sixth Doctor, he actually wants the Sixth Doctor to be killed and his remaining regenerations forfeited, and, evidently, transferred to himself. However, it is revealed later on in the serial, by the Master, that the Valeyard is in fact an older incarnation of the Doctor from further along in their timeline. The Valeyard is in fact referred to by the Master as somewhere between his 12th and final regeneration. In the novelisation, it's more explicitly stated between his 12th and 13th regeneration. However, in the broadcast version, it does state 12th and final, which leaves a lot of room for interpretation. For example, now we know that the Doctor has had many cycles, so has passed the threshold of the 12th regeneration many times before in the past, and potentially will again in the future. Now in the show we have had a 12th and 13th Doctor, and there was no hint of the Valeyard coming from or splitting off from either of them during their regenerations. At least as of the beginning of 2023, that's not the case. So, let's move on to his expanded media appearances and see what the Valeyard gets up to outside of the courtroom, for which we're starting with a story where he spends the entire time pretty much in a courtroom. The Big Finish audio Trial of the Valeyard. So, in Trial of the Valeyard, following the events of Trial of a Time Lord, the Valeyard is put on trial by the Time Lords for tampering with the Matrix, though it's later revealed that this is actually because he refused to give up the secrets of infinite regenerations that were apparently housed in the Doctor's Black Scrolls, which coincidentally kind of sounds like a confession dial from the 12th Doctor's era. So, while he's on trial, he asks specifically for the Sixth Doctor to be brought in to act as his solicitor. During the events of the trial, the Valeyard recounts his personal history, claiming he was found on the moon of Ethro by prosecutors who tested his biodata, revealing him to be the same as the Doctor, and then exiling him to a place called the Shadow House, where Time Lords whose regenerations have went wrong or time anomalies are kept away from Time Lord society. Here, he learns that Time Lords have the ability to regenerate indefinitely, but due to Rassilon's intervention, they're capped at 12 lives. The Valeyard then goes on to claim that he was in fact the result of illegal experiments made by the Doctor's 13th self. In the events of the story, the Sixth Doctor comes face to face with this mad incarnation, who dies by asphyxiation, as he's swallowed whole by the muddy ground of the planet he's on. Although this is all unreliable, as this incarnation of the Doctor is revealed to be the Valeyard in disguise, and he was attempting to kill the Doctor and the High Council of Galatasaray through opening the Black Scrolls that housed the secret of regeneration, which in reality was just a bomb. As the story comes to a close, the Doctor, however, ponders the idea that the Valeyard story might have had some truth to it, and is left in a bit of a contemplative state regarding his eventual role in creating the Valeyard. Moving on to the book Millennial Rights, which was a past Doctor adventure from the Virgin New Adventure line. So again, another Sixth Doctor story. This one's a bit strange. It's written by Craig Hilton, and in this, the Sixth Doctor stops the world coming to a grisly end as a Great Old One, revealed to be the Great Intelligence, a future Lovecraftian entity from another reality past ours, and a powerful reality-altering computer program clash and cause a closed bubble of time to be altered into an almost Dungeons & Dragons style realm, where all the people caught in its range are transformed into mythical-like creatures with a whole history and lore of their own. As far as they're concerned, this is how things have always been, but only in this one closed triangle in the centre of London. As the Doctor is alien, the changes to him aren't immediate, so over the course of the story, he starts to change into this version of himself that's referred to by the creatures of this realm as the Dark One, or He Who Shouldn't Be Named, which turns out to be the Valeyard. He flits between the two incarnations, and the Doctor has to fight his darker side, and at one point, as the Valeyard, attempts to sacrifice a baby This is all reverted, and the Valeyard fails to take over the Doctor entirely, though this might not have actually been the Valeyard, but rather the Doctor's idea of the Valeyard corrupting him in this odd bubble of reality. Moving back to the Big Finish series, we've got the story The Last Adventure. Now, I won't go too much into detail about the individual stories on this, but each part of this 4-part have something to do with the Valeyard, and it's well worth listening to, so hence why I'm not going to go into too much detail. However, the 4 stories are set between Trial of a Time Lord and Time of the Rani, with the final actually syncing up with the first opening minutes of Time of the Rani. The final story, which is called The Brink of Death, reveals how the Valeyard is attempting to take over the Doctor's body. And in the final minutes of the story, the Doctor forces a regeneration, removing the possibility of the Valeyard doing so and stealing his remaining lives. However, this leaves him unsure if the regeneration of the 7th Doctor will actually take place, or if he will just die as a result. The 7th Doctor, as they are regenerating on the console floor, speaks to the 6th Doctor in his mind, assuring them that everything will be fine and that it's all prepared for, similar to the idea of a Watcher from Tom Baker to Peter Davison's 4th and 5th Doctor. So now moving away from the 6th Doctor, we've got the book Matrix, which is a 7th Doctor story, in which an amnesiac 7th Doctor is fighting a potential future where the timeline was altered into a horrific dystopia by Jack the Ripper. Young kids running around with blades attached to their hands, going around and killing people in the streets, and a dark entity hovering over the whole world, essentially, but mainly London, and corrupting people and bringing out the worst in people. This all happens due to the fact that Jack the Ripper had killed more people in this timeline than should have been killed in the original timeline. And throughout the first half of the story, it's heavily implied that the Doctor is actually Jack the Ripper, and a lot of people do think that throughout the story. Although, of course, it is revealed to be the Valeyard who is doing the killings. Although, technically, if you think about it, with the Valeyard being the Doctor from a future point in time, then the book makes the point that the Doctor is Jack the Ripper. And this story is interesting for the fact that it has the Valeyard dying at the end after being hit by lightning and then falling from a church steeple, at which point he begins to regenerate, but we never see the results of this regeneration as he escapes in his mausoleum TARDIS before the Doctor or Ace can get to the scene. Now, moving on further to the 8th Doctor, during the Time War, we have the story in the Big Finish box set Time War 3, The War Valeyard. So this is a potential backstory from where the Valeyard comes from. However, it's also potentially not really the Valeyard. It might be a completely separate entity that just so happens to have the same personality and face as the Valeyard, as it's been extracted from a version of the Doctor that's aware of the Valeyard in the future. The 8th Doctor's transmatted from one world to another, and during this transmat, there's a glitch which creates a completely separate entity with the same biodata as the Doctor, which the Time Lords realise is the Valeyard. And as they're fighting the Time War, and they want the Doctor to join at this point, they think, well, the Valeyard, perfect, he's already willing to go kill things, we'll just inscript him. So it seems like he's sent on an awful lot of missions and does quite a successful job. However, the only thing we hear of it is he's sent on a mission to stop some unknown force using a weapon that would potentially wipe out all universal traces of the Time Lords. And he's sent to this planet to use the device itself to wipe out the enemy, which obviously we know is the Daleks, but at this point the weapon has been used, so no one in the universe knows what a Dalek is anymore. When the Doctor finds this out, he's really angry and steals someone else's TARDIS to go down to this planet and find the Valeyard. However, this version of the Valeyard has been living the same day in Groundhog Day fashion over and over again for potentially thousands of years, fighting constructs of Daleks that are just part of his own imagination. It's just remnants of what was there. Over the course of the story, we follow this version of the Valeyard, who has the same face as the Valeyard, but claims himself to be the Doctor. At multiple points, we do see the traditional Valeyard that we all know from Trial of a Time Lord, taunting and potentially killing people. However, this is all revealed to be, again, a part of the Valeyard Doctor that we're following's mind. When the Doctor intervenes and reveals what is actually happening, He begs to stay trapped in the cycle because he doesn't want to become the Valeyard again and would rather be the Doctor in this closed loop than risk a regression back to that evil version of himself. However, this might have been undone as the Daleks are inevitably brought back by the Dalek Time Controller due to the Daleks coming back. He's potentially still out there somewhere, either thinking himself to be the Doctor or regressed back to thinking himself as the Valeyard. In which case, if that is true, then the Valeyard we see in Trial of a Time Lord might actually be this version, and this might actually be the origin of the Valeyard, however it's left up to interpretation. Finally, the story He Jests at Scars, which is another audio, but this time coming from the non-canonical Unbound series from Big Finish. So, in He Jests at Scars, the question is asked, what if the Valeyard had won at the end of Trial of a Time Lord? In this, he manages to kill the Doctor, proceeds to change his own timeline and try and correct the faults the Doctor had caused. His first act is wiping out the Daleks, which the Time Lords allow, as they see this as a job being completed, albeit on a very, very late timescale. However, he then proceeds to wipe most things out in the universe, or potentially everything in the universe out, by slowly going further and further back in time, trying to stop himself from being destroyed by the web of time, as he creates a paradox when destroying a planet that his fourth incarnation was at the time. So he goes further back and destroys the entire solar system, so his fourth self could never go there. Unfortunately for him, the first incarnation of the Doctor was on the planet, and as such, the web of time continues trying to fix the issue as he desperately tries to avoid his comeuppance. In the end, it's revealed that him and Mel are trapped motionless in the TARDIS, unable to move apart from briefly speaking to each other, for even the slightest movement would destroy all that was left of the universe, which is just the TARDIS itself. Soon after that, even the ability to speak is removed, and they spend eternity motionless. So, theories and oddities. I read a very interesting theory the other day on r/Gallifrey on Reddit, mentioning the title, The Shadow of the Valeyard. So, in the 11th Doctor's era, the Shadow of the Valeyard is a name that the Great Intelligence references to the 11th Doctor as a title that the Doctor would take up before the end of their life. However, this post posited that the Doctor being the shadow of the Valeyard essentially means that the Valeyard came first, because you can't be the shadow of something unless you're the second one, which is interesting because it kind of works with the idea of the Timeless Child incarnations, because we've had countless versions of the Doctor that we don't know of from different points in the timeline that we're probably never going to find out about. There's no reason one of them couldn't have been the Valeyard. Potentially the first time the Doctor came to the end of their 12 regeneration limit that was imposed on them by Rassilon and Tecteun, which I think makes a lot of sense in the way things are shown in the original serial to feature the character the Trial of a Time Lord, because in that, as we discussed before, the Valeyard wants the Sixth Doctor's remaining regenerations, which would be a paradox if the Valeyard comes after the Sixth Doctor, as by killing the Sixth Doctor, the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and on wouldn't happen, and therefore the Valeyard would never come into existence. Or at least that's how I see it. Another popular theory was that the Meta-Crisis Doctor that was left on the parallel Earth is the Valeyard. Obviously this is another David Tennant incarnation, and the story that fans tend to go with is that at some point Rose Tyler dies, the Meta-Crisis Doctor, being unable to regenerate, attempts to go back to our universe and steal the regenerations from the Doctor so that he can continue his life the way he wants to. Then there's also the possibility that the Valeyard is from an aborted timeline, because the events of Trial of a Time Lord, Matrix, and a whole bunch of other stories set in the Wilderness Years essentially say that the Valeyard isn't going to happen because the 6th and 7th Doctor both came to terms with that side of themselves. Therefore, that version would never exist in the future. However, we have references to it in New Who, even just by name drops. So I think it's unlikely that the Valeyard isn't going to happen or hasn't already happened somewhere in modern Who that we just haven't seen yet on screen. So that's the end of the list. Valeyard is a very unique character that I'd love to see again in more media. This wasn't comprehensive. I'm sure there's more out there that alludes to or full-on uses the Valeyard. However, you don't really see a lot of people talking about a few of these appearances, and a lot of people only see Trial of a Time Lord and think, oh, that's a bit of a weird oddity. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, you can check us out on Spotify, on our podcast, Tranquil Repose, Doctor Who Chat Time, where we speak to actors and characters from the Doctor Who universe using AI, which often leads to some hysterically bad takes from some of the characters. We also have another podcast on Spotify called The Land of Fanfiction. I narrate fan works in the style of Big Finish's short trips. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.